Well, hey, everybody. Hey, let's go ahead and find our seats. Welcome to Renewed Mind Bible Studies. Guys, we just have this session and one more, and we finished Ecclesiastes, which means then we can take 2 weeks to collectively catch our breath before we jump into Song of Songs. Man, bring that energy in May. Okay. So what we've been doing is this study, the subtitle has been Chasing the Wind, and that's because the wind is something you can't really grab a hold of. It's a term used all throughout Ecclesiastes, and every week we've been highlighting something different that we try to grab a hold of in our search for meaning in life. This week is all about certainty. It's chasing certainty. And by this point, if you have been here for the other sessions, you know this, but the teacher's already taken us through several layers of what people try to build their lives on. What is the meaning of life when it comes to pleasure or achievement or control? Most recently, last week, we talked about security. Each one of those offers something that feels solid at first, but it falls through. So, spoiler alert, certainty is going to be the same, okay? This is not going to be the answer. The answer is not to be certain of everything. Eventually, they all reveal their limits. And what the teacher's wondering here is if none of these things can fully hold what the meaning of life is, what can I actually count on? And essentially what we're talking about tonight is how can we be certain of what we believe? Well, we want to know that things will work out. And we want to believe that if we make the right choices, live the right way, follow the right path, and respond the right way, there's something in us that longs for life to feel predictable. Even if we don't want it to be the same every day, we do want it to be predictable and we want it to feel fair. We want a sense that the future can be managed. And so Ecclesiastes chapter 7 through 10 are going to challenge all of that. So instead of offering clear answers, as I'm sure you've also noticed in this book, the teacher starts placing different pieces of wisdom side by side, making them feel familiar in some ways, and some of them would be brand new. At times, part of what we're going to read tonight sounds almost like Proverbs, but essentially, here's the hard truth for tonight, if you want the Cliff Notes. They're not Cliff Notes anymore, right? That's an old thing now. Spark Notes. Here's what ChatGPT would tell you. I don't know, whatever people use now. Good decisions do not always lead to good outcomes. Sorry. Wise people still face difficult situations, and justice does not always happen when we expect it to. Thank you for coming. Long after Ecclesiastes was written, we've been tying this to the teachings of Jesus, and tonight's no different. In Matthew 7, starting in verse 24, he says this, "Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash." What I really want you to take away from this is this. He gives you teachings, but the teachings don't always come with guarantees. The guarantee that we do have is eternal life with our Savior. And that's a pretty big one, if you ask me. But we want guarantees for the now. We don't have it. The takeaway is this. Anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish. He's full of giving us teachings, and there's a broad way to apply them, but there's a right and a wrong way as well. This is where Ecclesiastes is taking us tonight. That's where wisdom begins to lead us. It's not to a guarantee. It's meant to lead us to trust in the Lord himself. Amen. First section, when wisdom feels backwards, centered around the first 14 verses of chapter 7 of Ecclesiastes. This is where a lot of it seems to be a little bit like Proverbs. For those of you that read this in advance, it reads like Proverbs, doesn't it, with these short sayings? And some of them are pretty great. I am going to read to you the first 4 verses. But not all 14 of them. It says, "A good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume." That sounds like ancient wisdom and true. "And the day you die is better than the day you are born." Okay. That's attached by the word "and." That's one whole thought. Okay. "Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart." He says, "Sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on us." I heard a heavy sigh already. I'm sorry, guys. All right. Verse 4, "A wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool thinks only about having a good time. I read this scripture to somebody earlier this week. They said, I must be the wisest person of all time. Anybody here? I'll just be honest. Is there anybody here who thinks about death probably more than people think you think about it? Okay. Yeah. Well, congrats. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but you've just stumbled into another part of it. So if a lot of that sounds backwards, it's because it is, okay? And literally speaking, that's the point. The teacher is using a method here that is meant to feel off-putting and grab your attention. He wants to wake you up as you're reading this. Wisdom doesn't always align with what feels good in the moment. In fact, wisdom often pulls us in the opposite direction of what we want instinctively. So when he says it's better to spend time at a funeral than a party, and by the way, I've been to several of both. I don't literally agree with this statement. It's not because funerals are enjoyable. He's saying this because funerals force us to see something we usually avoid. Something we usually avoid. They bring us face to face with reality. Life is fragile. Time is limited. What we are building on this earth will not last forever. And so the word that's translated as funerals is Beit Evel, and it's actually more literally translated as a house of mourning. House of mourning, and that is Mourning. It carries the idea of a place where people are confronted with loss, somewhere that they are unable to be distracted from it. So for everybody who loves to find some good disassociation, this ain't your chapter. That's why he says that sorrow is better than laughter, because laughter's not wrong, but laughter can be fleeting, and sorrow has a way of doing something that laughter can't. If you've ever had this moment of deep sorrow, sorrow slows us down and forces us to reflect. It makes us think, and that word that he translates as sorrow is from the Hebrew word ka'as. It refers to grief or frustration or emotional weight. Emotional weight. So if you're like, well, I don't think I've got sorrow today. Well, out of those three definitions, maybe you do. It's the kind of experience that presses on your heart until something changes. And the teacher's shown us that wisdom is a lot of times formed in places that we would not choose. Unfortunately, it's not the happiest places. I'm sure that there are some stories like this. I've just not heard them. I've just never heard of stories of people going to like Disney World and having these deep moments of wisdom revelation outside of Epcot Center or whatever. Like things that we enjoy, it's great. But there is meaning and value in the sorrow as well. So he continues by saying it's better to be corrected by a wise person later on in this reading than to be praised by fools. And while we would all agree with that in theory, most people would rather be affirmed than corrected. But the word that's translated as rebuke there comes from the Hebrew word ga'ar, and that means to confront or to challenge. Challenge is your blank there, or to call something out directly. This is not a gentle term, it's something that is necessary. Correction, when it comes from wisdom, always leads somewhere, but empty praise never leads anywhere. The laughter of fools, he talks about, he gets descriptive in this. It's like the crackling of thorns in a fire. It makes noise and flares up quickly. It just doesn't last. And so following this, the teacher begins to speak about both patience and perspective. He says things like finishing is better than starting. That statement cuts against the whole culture that we have that celebrates beginnings. Starting something is exciting. There's grand openings and ribbon cuttings and things with great potential. And if you have two restaurants that you can walk into, we generally prefer the one that feels new rather than the one that feels 38 years old, unless it's a diner for breakfast, and then that is the one that you want. But he's talking about the finishing is better because the finishing requires walking through difficulty, staying constant. And the word that's translated as patient there is from the Hebrew word erek. And that literally means long of spirit. Long of spirit. That makes me think of when it talks about the fruit of the Spirit and that fun King James term for patience, long suffering. If you've ever had to be patient, you're like, yeah, let's go back and use long suffering again. This is describing someone who can stretch and endure and stay consistent over a long period of time. So wisdom is not just about what we know, it's about how we endure. And now, when you think about those concepts of things like control and perspective, he warns against longing for the good old days, as if the past was always better. That kind of thinking always traps us. It pulls us out of the present and it creates a version of reality in the past that is just not entirely true. We're all guilty of this at times. Finally, he covers everything into something that we have seen before. He says, accept the way that God does things, for who can straighten what he has made crooked? And that word crooked comes from the Hebrew word avath, which means something that is bent or distorted. So your blank there is distorted. And he's not saying God makes things wrong. I understand what crooked frequently means in modern language. He's just saying there's aspects of life that are a certain shape and you can't straighten it, fix it, or control it. Life is not one steady experience. It moves through things that contrast with one another. You've got joy and difficulty, ease and challenge. Both are part of what God allows you to walk through. And so renewing our minds means that we have to look at these backwards, I put that in quotation marks, moments differently. This is actually part of how God forms us. This is part of how he grows us and stretches us. You've got a couple personal insight questions there. And the second section is the last half of chapter 7. Did we miss a blank there? What's that? I don't think it's supposed to be there. I think that might be last week. We'll circle back at the end and make sure. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 15 through 29. I knew something was off because I didn't hear all the pages flip. All right. Yeah, okay. It's from last week. Scratch it out. It's a bonus point. All right. The limits of righteousness. Now, this sounds a little weird, doesn't it? The limits of righteousness. Can you have too much righteousness? We don't like it when people are self-righteous, but can you have too much righteousness? He starts out, I'm just gonna read a couple verses to you again. He says, I've seen everything in this meaningless life, including the death of good young people and the long life of wicked people. Who here cannot relate to that, one way or the other or both? Because in our opinions, we've all seen somebody gone before their time, and we've all seen someone where we're like, I cannot believe they're still alive. Does God even still smite? I have made that joke before and said that, but I've never said it from the pulpit. He says in verse 16, don't be too good or too wise. Why destroy yourself? And on the other hand, don't be too wicked either. Don't be a fool. Seems weird, right? And then he goes on to tell a story, and we'll get there. This is one of the most uncomfortable moments to me in the entire book of Ecclesiastes, because if you do just read it at face value and you don't understand the points that he's trying to make, it really does seem like he's saying, be a little wise sometimes, be a little foolish sometimes, live it up. It sounds weird. But up until this point, there's been this sense that wisdom matters, that even though it's not everything, it's really important. And here he's looking at this and he's admitting something that just doesn't fit into that idea. He says, in this meaningless life, I've seen both of these. And he talks about righteous people that die early and wicked people who live long. Like I said, who here can't think of someone that would fit into that, someone that you were surprised to see still here after all these years? And that fact alone disrupts the expectation that a lot of people carry, because we want life to feel fair. We want life to feel fair. And we want to believe that if we do what is right, things will go well, and if we do what is wrong, consequences will come quickly. This is part of what Job's friends were understanding when they were trying to help him admit what was wrong, and boy, were they on a rough assignment there. The teacher's trying to make sure we understand that's just not how life works. The word that's translated here as righteous comes from the Hebrew word tzaddik. It means somebody who is just, upright, or somebody who is living in alignment with God. Alignment with God. Additionally, the word for wicked there is rasha, which describes someone who disregards what is right. Disregards what is right. Again, this is not somebody who doesn't know the right thing to do and stumbles into the wrong thing. This is someone who knows and disregards it. That's a different thing. Both of these exist in the same world, and both experience outcomes that don't always match our expectations, and that's why life often feels unfair. Even though it's not directly about people that die early or live longer than we think that they should, he's highlighting that this is one of the key places in our life on earth that actually makes us wonder, what does the justice system in the cosmos actually look like? Because to us, when you find that somebody's committed a crime, you apprehend them, you charge them, you convict them, and then there's discipline or punishment, whatever. And we try to look at this throughout the life that we live too. He's wondering things like, if wickedness doesn't immediately lead to a downfall, what does that mean for how we understand justice? So he gives a warning that to me felt surprising. He said, don't be too righteous and don't be too wicked. What he's basically saying here is not moderation. He's saying that every person of faith struggles with this. It's the illusion of control through righteousness. Righteousness. And listen, this is one of the hardest things that every person of faith has dealt with, whether they've ever had the language to put to this or not. It could be as easy as when Cassie and I decided we wanted to have kids, and then wondering why it was taking so long to have kids, because we were living for the Lord and we were trying to do everything the right way, which really just exposed our expectation that if we did something for him, we'd get the things that we wanted, which also then exposed that part of why we were doing the things for him was to get what we wanted and not because it was the right thing to do. That's just part of the human condition. It could be just as simple as, well, why won't my finances turn around? Or why can't I keep friends around, more or whatever? What's the point of doing the right thing? This is what he's getting at. It is possible to live, quote unquote, right with the expectation that it will protect you from difficulty. And the teacher and the preacher, I guess, we're both here to tell you that that is not so. You can make all the correct choices, and you think that you can avoid pain, loss, or even uncertainty, and the teacher is trying to expose that mindset because you'll be better off to throw that out the window. Righteousness, this is important. I don't know if I put this in your notes, but you should know righteousness is not a tool to control life. It is a way to honor God within life. So righteousness is not something you do to get what you want. It's something you do because God has already given you what you don't deserve. So righteousness is what you do to navigate your way through life. And the same is true for the other side. Living recklessly doesn't lead anywhere good, obviously. The teacher's not encouraging you to have some sort of Judeo-Christian yin-yang of balancing good and evil. He's warning against the extremes that misunderstand how life actually works, because both are attempts to live life on your own terms. On your own terms. Christians, we cannot afford to live life on our own terms. So he brings it back to wisdom. It's wisdom literature after all. And he says, those who fear God will avoid both extremes. Reverence for God always keeps us from trying to manipulate life through our behavior. And it keeps us from drifting off into carelessness. And as all of these verses continue, the teacher's just reflecting on wisdom itself. He's saying wisdom makes one person stronger than 10 rulers in a city. It has real value. But he does also say this. He says that not a single person on earth is always good and never sins. So he's reminding us that even the wise, even the righteous are still human. We're still limited, we are still imperfect, and even our best efforts are incomplete. And he even warns against taking anything that people say too seriously. On our own, when we're upset about something, we want to gravitate to the people who are going to tell us that we're right and the other people are wrong. And he's saying, at some point, everybody has spoken wrongly about someone else, including us. And you know what that means? I'm gonna give you revelation tonight. 3 words. People are inconsistent. In case you've been wondering, including us, we are not always reliable sources of truth or affirmation. Affirmation. So now hopefully you understand a little bit more about the limits of righteousness. Living the right way does matter. It just can't guarantee you a predictable, controllable, or comfortable life. Wisdom can inform how you live. It's just never gonna be enough to secure the outcome. All right, now we move on to chapter 8. Chapter 8, this is the frustration of injustice. He teased it a little bit, and now he's gonna dive headfirst into it. This is where he starts talking about the king. And there is something that continues to disrupt this idea of certainty here. It's authority and injustice. This is one of the normal struggles for people as they try to come to the Lord. Well, if I was a good God and I saw the suffering in the world, I would do this, fill in the blank. Every time we say that or have that thought, we're essentially saying I could do a better job on that throne. It's a dangerous place to be. But that is essentially what we're saying. We have to recognize there are things that we don't understand. But the teacher begins by acknowledging that wisdom does have real value. It can change the way a person carries themselves, but he also places it in a setting that limits it as well. He starts by talking about kings, authority, and power. And take yourself back there, not just to like the title of king in different countries today. In his world, the king's word always carried weight that could not be questioned. So when he says, who can oppose the king's command? That question is not about just leadership of the day, it's about control. The king has all power and all control, so what are you gonna do to change it? Well, guess what? There is a king. There is a king in heaven. And so he's saying there are structures in life that are bigger than us, decisions that affect us, and systems that we can't easily change, if at all. So that word that's translated as authority, it connects to the Hebrew word shilton, which talks about ruling power or dominion. Dominion. It's talking about the kind of control that belongs to someone else. Dominion means you have complete control over whatever this sphere is. It's the Lion King. Everything the light touches is your kingdom, Simba. At first, he encourages wisdom in how we respond. He said, obey wisely and be patient and recognize God's timing. There's this whole idea as you read through this chapter that navigating authority requires discernment. But that still doesn't fix the problem, because as you look at the authorities here on earth, people in power do wrong. And not only do they do wrong, but sometimes they get away with it. Justice gets delayed and consequences don't come when we expect them to. And when that happens, something shifts in the human heart. This is an example of what he says in the chapter. He says, when a crime is not punished quickly, people feel it is safe to do wrong. Would you agree with that? That line, that cuts straight into how injustice does tend to spread. It's the absence of immediate accountability creates the illusion that actions do not matter. And it tends to feed the belief that wrong can continue without consequence. I'm not just talking about crimes on the street. I'm talking about the way we treat each other, the way that we talk to one another. Sometimes we don't see it, so we assume it's not there, but he's saying it is. So even here, the teacher is holding on to something. He's saying that even though the wicked may seem to prosper, it will ultimately go better for those who fear God. Not right now, but ultimately. Again, we see that word, you don't have to put it down, but Yahweh, it's that sense of awe and everything. It's anchored in reverence. But he doesn't pretend that this knowledge makes it easy either. Because righteous people sometimes get what the wicked deserve. And wicked people sometimes receive what the righteous deserve. And that disrupts the whole idea that life follows a clean formula. But the whole issue here is that we want life to be predictable. We do. We may not want day-by-day monotony, but we do want to be able to predict life. We want cause and effect to be clear. We want justice to be visible and timely. We want to know that hard work always pays off, and the teacher is honest that life doesn't work that way. So he recommends having fun. He recommends having fun, but not as an escape or as a disassociation. There's that word again. He recommends having fun as a response. Big difference. In the same way that righteousness can be used in the wrong way, fun is not something we do to try to blow off steam or relax. Fun is actually best when it is a response to the goodness of God in your life. Yes, you've got negative things in your life. You've got positive things too. Enjoy the things that he's given you and have fun with them, because that is a proper way to say thank you. If I gave my kids their stuffed animals or their toys and they only wrapped them in plastic and stuck them on a shelf and wouldn't let anybody touch them, I'd stop getting them stuff. I probably should anyway. Bottom line is this. You can search and you can pursue wisdom, and there are still gonna be things that you just can't fully explain. You might not understand everything God is doing, but that doesn't mean that he's not at work. All right, chapter 9, the unpredictability of life. The subtitle, if you're reading the New Living Translation, says, Death Comes to All. So thanks for being here. After wrestling with wisdom, righteousness, injustice, the teacher steps back and he starts to look at life as a whole. What he sees is not something that is predictable, which we've read through. The righteous and the wise are in God's hands, and there is comfort in that. There's security in knowing that our lives are not outside of his care. But at the same time, nobody knows what lies ahead. Nobody knows their last day. Whether love or hate, blessing or hardship is ahead, we just don't know. So what he's trying to teach us is this: the same destiny ultimately awaits everyone. Righteous or wicked, good or evil, devoted or indifferent, the same reality comes for all, and that reality is death. Death doesn't sort itself according to how we expect life to work, and a lot of times we believe that if we live the right way, we can choose not just our decisions, but the outcomes of what will come as well. But instead of leading us into despair, the teacher wants us to shift our perspective. Anyone who is among the living has hope. Anyone who is among the living has hope. And as long as there is life, there's always opportunity, still meaning, and still a chance to live with purpose. Anytime I've talked to somebody who said, I'm not sure that I have purpose, like, you're alive. If you had no purpose here, God would not let you stay here. There is always purpose. I'm not saying it's always easy to discern or find, but there is always purpose. And to drive that home, you know what he says? He says right here, a living dog is better than a dead lion. A living dog is better than a dead lion. And you need to understand that in this culture, a lion represented strength and honor, and a dog was seen as low and insignificant. And he was like, yeah, but if you're a dog and alive, you're still winning. Life itself, even in its most humble form, carries value. We have to remember this. Because from there, he begins to describe what it looks like to live in light of that reality. Everyday expressions of life, things that we take for granted, literally every day. Eating with joy, enjoying a good drink with a grateful heart. He says wearing clean clothes. How many of us put that in our prayers when we were thanking the Lord today? Somebody here is like, I should have changed my shirt. And he says, enjoying life with the people you love, giving yourself fully to the work in front of you. These don't seem like grand accomplishments or extraordinary achievements, but they're actually faithful responses to the gift of life as it is, not as we wish that life would be. And so the fastest runner doesn't always win the race, and the strongest warrior doesn't always win the battle, but while skill, strength, and wisdom are things we all want, they just don't guarantee the outcomes. And so the word that is translated chance here comes from the Hebrew word pegah. Pegah. And this actually refers to an occurrence, an event, or something that happens without warning. Something that happens without warning. From our perspective, life includes moments that arrive unexpectedly outside of our planning. And he's just trying to say as we wrap up this chapter that, or this section, that time and chance happen to everyone. That statement doesn't remove God from the picture. To us, it feels random or happenstance, but he's still fully in control of how life unfolds. And we have to learn how to make our plans, but make them with humility and embrace what God puts in front of us and recognize that life itself is a gift. It's not something that guarantees you'll get to do everything that you want with that gift. The last section for today. Wisdom still matters, but we'll finish chapter 9 and we'll go through chapter 10 on this. This starts written out a little bit more and then falls back into that whole Proverbs vibe by chapter 10. As the teacher begins to close this section out, though, he does something that really does feel surprising at the same time. Everything that he said about unpredictability, injustice, and the limits of control, he returns to wisdom again, but with a different tone. Because he starts with a story. And so he tells a story here of a small city that is weak and vulnerable and surrounded by powerful enemies. And there's no obvious way out, no strength to match the threat. But within that city is one poor, wise man who finds a way to deliver the city from the enemy. It's a moment that should stand out and be remembered, but that man is forgotten. That man is forgotten. That's your first blank for this section. Hey, by the way, who's the 5th president of the United States? I'm just saying, doesn't matter if you're the president, you still get forgotten. All right. That detail carries the idea that this man gets forgotten. While wisdom worked and it brought deliverance, it still didn't secure recognition or status or any sort of lasting reward by our standards. And the teacher is showing us that wisdom also doesn't guarantee that it'll get noticed or honored the way that we might hope. Wisdom is better than strength. But the teacher also says one sinner can destroy much that is good. That word that's translated as destroy comes from the Hebrew word abad. And in case you're really into it, later on you'll see Abaddon, the destroyer towards the end times. But it means to ruin or lose or bring something to nothing. To bring something to nothing. That picture is that there's something that's been built carefully over time, but it can be undone quickly. And that idea continues as it folds over into chapter 10. That's where the teacher uses a series of really sharp visual proverbs for us. Things like dead flies make a bottle of perfume stink. I'm gonna be honest, I read that and I'm like, I didn't need to be taught that. I just assumed. But what is he saying there, right? He's saying it only takes something small to corrupt something valuable. There's a lesson in that. A little foolishness can outweigh wisdom in how a person is perceived. Perceived. He's saying one careless moment can undo a reputation built over years. And the teacher's describing the difference between the wise and the foolish in practical ways. This is something every believer needs to pay attention to. The wise move with direction and the foolish wander without awareness. This is something, I think it was in our second lesson in this that we were talking about. There is purpose and we can see where we're going for the wise, but for the foolish, they're moving, they just don't really know where they're going. And he's saying here leaders can act foolishly. Those in authority can make poor decisions. Systems can feel upside down. People who should be able to lead wisely don't. And there are some that could lead well and they're overlooked. And it's another reminder that life just doesn't always align with what we think it should be. But he's trying to teach us this: carelessness has consequences. And he's not just talking about overt, obvious, intentional sin here. Carelessness has consequences. Words carry weight. Even our small actions can create larger outcomes that we never intended over time. Wisdom matters because it tells us how to live as we move through a world that's already unpredictable, but he's saying that when you're careless, you're adding to the unpredictability. So he's saying wisdom is valuable, it's just not absolute. It's not absolute. It can guide us, and even it can't guarantee the outcomes. It strengthens us, but that does not make us untouchable. So after everything that the teacher said about wisdom and power and unpredictability, he zooms into something as simple as the words at the very end of chapter 10, especially the ones that we think are hidden. In verse 20, it says not to make light of or to curse the king. He says, do not curse the king even in your thoughts, or the rich even in your bedroom, for a little bird might deliver your message. And this is long before Twitter. The point is not that birds are literally reporting conversations, thank God. It's that words have a way of traveling. What we say in private has a tendency to surface somehow. And what we think is contained often isn't. That's probably a lesson we've all learned at some point. So in a world where power structures are already unstable, careless words can create consequences that we never intended. And that word that is translated as curse comes from the Hebrew word kalal. It means to make light of, or treat with contempt, or to dishonor. So most of us wouldn't say that we had cursed people, but it means to make light of, to treat with contempt, or to dishonor. And this includes the quieter, more subtle ways that we dismiss or mock or speak lightly about others sometimes. The teacher's trying to show us that wisdom is not just about our big decisions, it's also revealed in everyday restraint. In a world that we can't fully control, one of the clearest places wisdom shows us what to do is in how we speak, especially when nobody else is around. If you're watching online, we'll go ahead and we'll cut the live stream here, and we'll finish up the Ecclesiastes study next week. But we're gonna do table discussion, followed by our worship for the evening, and thanks for being here.